Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on the fifth layer of a cyber defense in-depth strategy. IT Governance, as many of you know, is a one-stop provider of cyber defense in-depth solutions. We are an organization with some 20 years worth of experience in cyber and privacy, almost entirely in and around governance, process, risk management, the kind of key areas that ensure that deployment of technology does the job it should. We have nearly 1,000 organizations. We've helped ISO 27001 certification. We're CREST accredited penetration tester and incident responder, a Cyber Essentials certification body, a PCI QSA. We train lots and lots of people on cybersecurity and privacy. So an all-round place that people can go to access whatever it is that they need to deal with cybersecurity and privacy, with a suite of solutions that are integrated across platforms in a way that enables you to put people on a training course, safe in the knowledge that what they learn on the training course will be in line with what they hear from the consultant that might be helping you with a particular project, will be in line with books and tools, and of course with the external standards and laws that you might be seeking to comply with. I'm Alan Calder, I'm your host for this afternoon. I've been in the cybersecurity world for about 20 odd years. I founded IT Governance and merged it into what is now GRC International Group, the AIM-listed cybersecurity specialist, written a number of books around cybersecurity, lots of them on people's Christmas present lists, I know. Christmas stocking, early morning reading, pocket guide fits very neatly into a Christmas stocking if that's what you're looking for. I'm going to talk today about cyber defense in depth, so a quick summary of some of the cyber breaches, stuff that's in the news, what the fifth stage of a cyber defense in depth strategy is and what it should mean for your company, data breach processes, why data breach processes are so important, how you can prepare for a data breach. The kind of approach that we encourage organizations to have is the one that recognizes that if you haven't been breached, it's because you're not looking closely enough. It's racing certainty. You've had breaches anywhere between small, medium, and perhaps quite big. I'll share some statistics with you around breaches. We'll look at what happens once a breach is identified. We'll look at cyber insurance and the role of cyber insurance in a cyber defense in-depth strategy, and then, of course, a quick look at some practical solutions. You will have noticed that you're all on mute. That's to avoid background noise and those kind of disruptions. But please, as we go through the webinar, if you find that you have questions that you would like me to answer, do put them into the Q&A or the chat function in your screen. You'll see a box for questions. You can simply choose question, type a question in there, and when we come to the Q&A section, which will be in about 35 to 40 minutes from now, I'll pick up all the questions which I've got. I'll share the question with the audience, and then, assuming that I can, I'll provide an answer to the question. So that's the plan for today. Cyber attacks and data breaches in the news. Well, if you pay any attention to the news, you'll see cyber attacks are in it the whole time. What they kind of add up to is a number of interesting sets of statistics. Ransomware, the stuff that locks a device or a network, will attack a device every 2 seconds by 2031, up from about 11 seconds in 2021 last year. That's because it's a highly effective form of attack. A major global provider of secure storage, Rackspace, secure digital storage, is at the moment recovering from a ransomware attack. It's exactly the biggest issue that organizations have to deal with on any risk register. Ransomware, malware, cyber attack should be right up near the top. Cybercrime damages will increase by 15% per annum to something in the order of $10.5 trillion by 2025, up from $3 trillion in 2015. That's a huge increase at a number of levels. The cybercrime industry is an economy bigger than that of a couple in the top 10 global economies. The cybersecurity workforce gap is now about 3.4 million people. That is the number of people organizations require to help them deal with today's cybersecurity challenges is short by 3.4 million people. And that's because Organizations are not putting people through practitioner foundation training, the kind of training courses which ensure that they have staff on hand who understand what to do, how to deal with data security, how to deal with breaches when they happen. In fact, in the UK, the president of the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre said that 90% of incidents in the UK could have been prevented if people followed the basics, if they did the basics. That kind of implies you need to know what they are, and you need to have people competent to roll them out and teach staff across the organisation. The global average cost of a data breach increased to $4.3 million in 2022, the highest ever recorded since IBM launched its annual cost of a data breach report. The story is serious. The cybercrime is a clear and present danger for all organizations. We increasingly say to customers, only three things that you can be certain of: death, taxes, and cybercrime. The cost of a breach, as I said, increased to $4.3 million. That's a 13% increase from 2020. This is average cost. Of course, there'll be many breaches which cost down in the few $1,000s. There'll be many that cost in the hundreds of millions of dollars. That's an average. 95% of cybersecurity breaches are caused by human error. And that's human error, which includes clicking on a link that you shouldn't click on, sending data out to somebody who shouldn't have the data, giving somebody access rights they shouldn't have. Those are all human errors, but they all add up to and cause cybersecurity breaches. Investment fraud is the most costly form of cybercrime, $71,000 on average lost per victim. That's a form of fraud carried out very successfully. Cyber attackers on average have 11 days after breaching a network before they're detected on average. So they're in your network for, on average, 11 days before you even know they're there. You think how fast cyber attackers can move, the amount of damage they can do in that 11 days, pretty significant. Many organizations, from detecting to containing a breach, can take up to 9 months, because containing a breach can include having to clean out backups where the malware or the ransomware may have hidden itself. It includes having to upgrade and patch right the way across the system to remove vulnerabilities that the attackers exploit. Attackers increasingly are going for triple dips. So an attacker will put ransomware on your system. You'll get the opportunity to give them a number of bitcoins to get the key. They might even give you the key. They might not, but you'll give them some bitcoins. The next thing they'll do is say, by the way, we've already got your data. So if you'd like us not to sell it, give us some more bitcoins, which you'll probably do. And they'll still then go to the people whose personal data is on that list and say, oh, by the way, we've got your data. We're going to sell it on the dark web unless you'd like to give us some coins. You've got to remember that cyber criminals are scumbags. They're not people for whom dealing on any kind of honest, above-board basis is normal. They've got a valuable asset. They're going to do everything they can to exploit. That's the kind of reality of cybercrime. Some of the most recent breaches: Microsoft, 65,000 organizations had their data exposed across 111 countries, misconfigured Azure blob storage. Royal Mail, customers' information leaked to other users, a data breach where customers went to other users, and Royal Mail said, well, we'll deal with that by stopping access to click and drop. Interserve fined £4.4 million for failing to prevent a data breach. That's on top of the cost of dealing with the data breach and then putting in place the defenses they should have put in place in the first place. $4.4 million fine from the ICO, because as the ICO says, yes, you're doing something now, but you should have been doing something before you were breached. That's been the law since 2018. You failed. Here is a fine. Quite serious. Medibank criminal hacker had access to data of all 3.9 million customers, and given that it's a health insurer, that's going to include special categories of data, often the sort of data which has real value to an attacker because it has real value to the individual whose data has been stolen. That's just some of the stuff that's happening at the moment that organizations need to be dealing with. So in principle, what do? I've talked about this on our previous 4 webinars. You build defense in depth. Simply having a firewall is not enough. Simply having penetration testing to make sure that your outward-facing vulnerabilities have been identified and fixed is not enough, because the reality is that cyber criminals know what you're doing. They know what your defenses are like, and they're very good at getting past multiple layers of defense. So you have to build multiple layers of defense which recognize the nature of today's attackers. So the starting point is detection. You've got to identify an attack coming in, then you've got to protect, you've got to build up your protective capability. You've got to build then, with those kind of first layers in place, a much more comprehensive process. You then need a good response mechanism that enables you to escalate an incident and deal with it, and then you have to be able to recover when your systems go down, because you've got to allow for the possibility that however good your frontline defenses are, sooner or later something's going to get through and knock you over, and you've got to be able to deal with that quickly, because otherwise you're into the very expensive recovery process. Layered defenses mean that you get the right physical, technical, and administrative controls in place to safeguard your organization. In GDPR, in UK GDPR, as in EU GDPR, it talks about technical and organizational measures, TOMs. Technical and organizational measures is the collection of layered defenses that between them ensure that you are managing cybersecurity and data protection in a way that maximizes the likelihood of you surviving, avoiding, and if you can't avoid, surviving any significant cyber attack. So let's look in a bit more detail at the 5 stages, but particularly at the recovery stage. Stage 1, vulnerability scanning, phishing, anti-phishing training, testing people's anti-phishing knowledge, multi-factor authentication, kind of very basic, externally facing layer of defense. You've got to make sure that vulnerabilities, which are continually being identified, are identified in your internet-facing assets. So you run continual vulnerability scanning to do that. You need to train people not once a year, but quarterly, monthly, on what does the latest phishing exercise look like. And you need to do more than just give them staff awareness training. You need to send out test phishing emails, which will catch people out who think they know what they're doing. That's got to be done in a way that enables the phishing email to go to a safe environment. That's a kind of standard service from a company like us. But testing for phishing emails, remember, you have to be successful 100% of the time in keeping out today's attackers. The attackers only have to be successful one time, and they're in your system. That's the playoff. You're looking to 100% success in defense. They're looking through just one vulnerability that enables them to get in. Detection, protection, you need to have people inside the organization who are competent and capable to deal with people who click on a link they shouldn't click on. You need basic incident response capability. You need staff in your cybersecurity team who have to deal with password infestations, deal with emails that look wrong. So you need basic skills training in your IT team, basic cybersecurity awareness across the whole of the organization. The ability, in other words, to deal with those attacks that get through your frontline defenses. And those attacks will include attacks taking advantage of vulnerabilities that nobody yet knows about other than the attacker, what we call zero-day vulnerabilities. Cyber Essentials you might think of as a basic level of that protection layer. Cyber Essentials is 5 technical controls which in place, genuinely in place, not you kind of pretending they're in place, but genuinely in place, will protect you from something in the order of 80% of all internet-borne attacks. So building a protective layer behind your detective front line. Third step is management, working out where your key risks are. You've got basic defenses in place. Identify where your crown jewels are, your most important digital and other assets, working out what your risk appetite is, determining how to build additional controls around those assets, working out what regulatory controls you've got to deal with. That's all part of building a managed and robust approach to cybersecurity. You're still going to get breached, so how do you respond? How do you link your frontline incident response through to a broader major incident response process? How do you invoke your business continuity plan? What's your disaster recovery planning? How do you make sure that if a major system goes down, you can get it back up to a minimum tolerable level of operation in a minimum acceptable time? What's the maximum outage you can live with? All of those are key considerations in thinking about response. In critical national infrastructure, for instance, it's been a legal requirement for some time that there is a demonstrable incident response capability, demonstrable business continuity planning, all of those linked so that critical national infrastructure, when taken down by an attacker, is able to get critical processes back up and running within a planned time frame. And then there's recovery. All of that stuff costs money, getting systems back up and running, restoring from your disaster recovery unit, rebuilding, all of that costs money. And so a key component at this point is cyber insurance. And we'll talk a bit more about cyber insurance shortly. But you should be thinking of cyber insurance as no more than part of stage 5 of your cyber defense in depth. It's not part of 1, 2, 3, or 4, because all it's doing, cyber insurance, is mitigating cost. It's not mitigating likelihood, it's not mitigating impact, it's simply mitigating cost. So you want to have it because it'll be costly dealing with some breaches, but it's not enough on its own. So cyber defense and depth strategy, it's really disruptive, responding to a breach. Your average organization with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people in the IT team, you have a major cyber breach, they'll be completely overwhelmed just responding to people from around the business saying, what do I do about, how do I deal with this, what do I do here? They won't even have time to begin thinking about how to deal with cyber incident response. So you need to train them. You need to have plans in place which you've tested that enable you to deal with a situation in which you have a breach, your IT team is overwhelmed, but you know what you're going to do and how you're going to respond. So what should you be putting in place when you're thinking about response and recovery? Well, you need to do some basic risk assessment. As I said, you've got to identify, part of stage 3, identify your key assets, determine what your risk decisions are. Once you've identified the threats, the likelihood and impact of those threats, depending on which vulnerability they're going to exploit, you've then got to decide what you want to do. Are we going to live with it? Is the cost of defending against it so huge that actually we're just going to live with it? Are we going to reject it completely? We're not going to allow it to come anywhere near us. We'll go operate in a different country, or we'll go offline. Do we apply a control to it to reduce likelihood or impact, or do we outsource it by, perhaps going to an insurer and saying, actually, we can't reduce the impact, but we can buy some insurance from you, which means that you'll cover the cost of that. You've got to make those decisions. So deciding what cyber insurance is going to cover shouldn't just be a blanket decision. It should be part of a structured risk assessment process. And that risk assessment process, and you'll find when you talk to cyber insurers, if you haven't already, is they kind of expect you to have a whole bunch of other controls already in place. Increasingly, cyber insurers do not want to take risks with clients who are not looking after themselves. Long questionnaires, lots of evidence required, and an expectation that if you are breached, you will be able to demonstrate that you've got in place the things that you say you've got in place. So you need to think about cyber insurance as part of a structured process, a structured approach to dealing with cyber risk and making sure that your defense in depth strategy is going to be adequate for the challenges which you're facing. So what should you do? You've got a risk assessment, you know what you need to be doing, and one of the things you will be concluding, of course, is you need a proper structure for responding to incidents. No good waiting until the incident happens. It's way too late. Then imagine trying to work out what it says in your incident response plan if the incident response plan is locked down behind a ransom demand. You kind of need to have thought through all of those aspects, part of your basic planning. You need, in the core, most likely areas of response, not even to read the plan. You need people trained in your in your IT team, your incident response team. They know what to do. When somebody comes up and says, "I've just clicked on a link I shouldn't have clicked on. What do I do?" You need your IT team to go, "Okay, this is what you do. We know how to deal with this," and they give instructions and they carry it through immediately. They don't want to go away and say, page 3, no, that's not quite it. You need to be really clear about what you want to do. So, roles and responsibilities, critical part of planning for incidents. You need to make sure that everybody across the business knows how to report incidents. You need to make sure that your IT team knows how to do triage. They know who to refer issues to. They need to know who to call in under certain circumstances when they determine that this is a piece of ransomware we can't deal with. Who do we call in? How do we do it quickly enough? You need to inform people around the organization. So, posters, an icon on a laptop, some other method they can quickly raise an alarm. Even more challenging when you've got a dispersed workforce, and you need to make sure that people can, if somebody's laptop gets infected with ransomware, what they should almost immediately do is disconnect it from the network, close it down. Now, how are they going to tell the IT team that they have ransomware on their network? You need to think about that. They need to be able to phone or make contact on some other device, but you've got to plan for how do we alert the IT team? How do we take action to deal with that breach? So dealing with a breach, you also need to know where data is stored. It's very difficult to go, we've got this ransomware loose. They've probably been on the network for a few days. Where have they been if you don't know where your data is? And if you have an organization with data stored in a number of places in the cloud, or you have a mixed on-prem setup where you have a number of servers, maybe in a number of countries or a number of locations, and you don't know where the data is stored, it's very difficult to work out how to protect yourself. So a core part of preparing your incident response capability is data mapping. You should be doing this anyway, certainly where personal data is concerned, in order to comply with Article 30 of UK GDPR, which requires you to identify where data is stored, to map the processes by which data moves. You should be doing it anyway, but for your incident response planning, of course, that needs to include financial data, other corporate data, product data, all of the things that you need to be able to access. You need to know where they are. You need to know how they're protected. You need to be able to take action very quickly to isolate certain data if it's not isolated, depending on the nature of an attack. Of course, if you've got a good data map, you are then able to think about who should have access to the data. You can architect a security structure which enables you to determine who can access data on the basis of an internal classification, which can also enable you to put in place different authentication rules around data, which can give you embedded defenses against the lateral movement of attackers inside the network. But you need to be able to review how those controls are working. You need to be able to audit and check how those authentication controls are working, but you need to have them in place. It's a key part of limiting the spread of ransomware across the network. As soon as you have a breach, you're going to call in a forensic specialist. You need to have one on tap. You need to know who you're going to turn to. You probably have a data breach or an incident response retainer with an organization who have a 365, 24/7 response offering. They're going to want to look at your logs very quickly. They need to be able to find out what happened, when it happened. So do you have logs? Do you know where they are? Are they properly protected? What information are they gathering? That's a key part of your own preparation for incident response. Do you have yourself the log, the knowledge and the competence to review the logs? Is it collecting data which is useful? Because if not, the time to make those changes is now, before you have a breach, not after you have a breach. You need to know how you back up logs. Think about what happens if they get deleted, or if an attacker goes into the logs and changes some of the data. How do you ensure that the data you're looking at is the echt data that tells you what generally happened? How do you check the logs for unauthorized access or abnormal behavior, rather than just waiting for there to be a disaster? And now you've got to go and look and you go, oh, they were in here a week ago and 2 weeks ago and 3, so I can see it. You should have a part of your monitoring process, a technical and organizational measure should be checking logs on an ongoing basis to make sure that you know what's going on inside your critical paths of the network. What's your policy on paying ransoms? When your system is down and you've got ransomware spread across the whole of the network and you can't operate, you have to tell the ICO. You've got 72 hours to tell the ICO, or you might have to tell a supplier, tell a customer if you're a processor. What are you going to do? You're going to have to tell the market. If you're listed, your share price will get hammered. Are you going to pay the ransom to get out of trouble? You need to think about that before you're thinking about it's happened, What is your policy going to be? Because your policy is going to be affected by your insurer. Your insurers increasingly are saying, we don't want to pay ransoms, although it's the least expensive route often to get out of trouble. Lawyers you'll find advising against paying ransoms. And there is likely to be legislation in the UK which requires any payment of ransom to be made public as a way of officially discouraging organizations from doing so. Because, of course, if you pay a ransom, the attackers go, yay, that's nice. And we know that not only do we make money out of this, but we know that you won't have fixed your vulnerability. So we'll be back tomorrow with another ransom demand. We've had clients who've been attacked 3 times in 2 hours on exactly the same vulnerability by 3 separate cyber criminal gangs, because that's what they do. They go after vulnerabilities. And the fact that one's attacked you doesn't mean that a few more won't tomorrow or the week after. So you kind of need to be very clear about what are you going to do in terms of paying ransoms. Remember, your insurance has a limit. It might not pay out how much you need to pay out. All of those are practical issues you've got to consider when thinking about what your policy is on ransoms. So you've got to prepare. You need adequate staff. You need to know what you're going to do on Friday afternoon when everybody's out at the Christmas party, and that's when the attackers strike, because the attackers don't have Christmas parties. They take advantage of Christmas parties. So what are you going to do then? Who's going to be in charge of network response? Somebody working from home clicks on a link. They call your IT response team who are not there. The malware has Friday afternoon, the whole of the weekend, spread around the network. So you need to define roles and responsibilities. You need to train people on incident response. You need to make sure people really understand what a phishing email looks like, particularly the ones which are sent from within a hijacked supplier's network, because it'll look very genuine. On account of it will be genuine. You need formalized and tested response processes and procedures. Your vulnerability management needs to be up to scratch. Rackspace, it's thought, is suffering from this attack because it hadn't updated malware, hadn't updated known vulnerability since August. The log4j vulnerability, which is very widely known, there's a very high percentage of organizations which still haven't cottoned on to the fact that it's part of how their networks and their websites operate. Easy to exploit. So you need to improve vulnerability management. You don't need to have any. You need to close them down fast. Past incidents and breaches you need to learn from, formalized incident response tracking and workflow, having somebody tracking what you do as you respond so that you can learn from it. There's a good processes to put in place, improving cyber threat intelligence, forensic analysis. All of those are things in the longer term that help you get better at what you're doing. But you really do need to accept that being breached is what's going to happen to you. You are going to have a cyber breach, and so putting in place the mechanism to deal with it now kind of makes sense. It's a bit like, to take a fairly obvious example, if the city is being bombed, you don't, if you know that you're going to go to war, you don't wait for the bombs to come in before you think about digging trenches, before you think about building bomb shelters. You try and get those in place early. You think about what happens if a bomb hits a bomb shelter directly. How are we going to deal with the people inside? What are we going to do to protect our first responders? All of those are part of planning for dealing with what's going to happen. Cybercrime is at least as bad as dealing with a war situation. So what typically happens when you identify that there's been a breach? First step is you need to contain it. That's the job of your IT team. Typically, you'll be calling in experts from outside who will be able to identify exactly what the malware is, what it does. Most known malware has known ways of behaving. You need people who can, who know what to do, how to track it down, how to deal with it, trying to eradicate it as fast as possible, stop it from spreading. That's step number one. Don't wait until you have a breach before you decide who you're going to phone. Yes, you can go on the internet, you'll find half a dozen people who say that they can provide a service to you, but they might be busy. You know, if their instant responders are already tied up, they're in trouble. So it kind of makes sense to have a retainer with an organization where you know you go straight to the top of the queue if you have a breach. Once it's contained and you've got systems back up and running, the next step is how bad was it? What else do we need to do elsewhere in the network to deal with the ramifications of this breach? You certainly need to think about whether we've got something that we need to report. Has personal data been compromised? Its integrity, confidentiality, or availability. Has it been compromised? Because if it has, we probably have to report it certainly to the ICO, and if it's a significant breach involving substantial numbers of personal data or special categories of data, we may have to report it to the individuals themselves. And then, of course, it's the overall what lessons learned. What didn't we do right? What did we do right in our incident response? How could that all have been improved so that the next time we're breached, because there will be a next time, you respond better, more efficiently, and more effectively. And the organizations which do this stuff well are the organizations which get kudos for how they respond to breaches. Because they say, we had a breach, we contained it in 5 minutes, everything's sorted out, systems didn't go down, but we caught and dealt with the breach in this kind of time frame like that. Clients go, like this, want to deal with this. And there is more and more evidence that consumers are turning away from organizations that evidently can't protect their personal data. But how you communicate is an important part of your breach response. You should be the source of news, not the news. Journalists come to you and say, we think you've been breached. The wrong answer is, no, we haven't. We're sure we haven't. We're absolutely fine. The right answer is, tell us why you think that, and we'll go away and investigate, make sure that if you didn't know, you find out fast. You want to be as fast as you can onto the front foot. Ideally, when a journalist comes to you, you want to say, yes, we know that. We've already taken these steps to tell the world. Your own internal monitoring and processes should put you ahead of the news. Some of the most damaging breaches are the ones that come when a journalist gets hold of the fact that a breach has taken place because there's a leak from inside the organization, goes to management and says, no, it hasn't happened. A few days later they go, yes, it has happened, but it wasn't very bad. And then a few days later they go, well, it was quite bad. And then a few days after they go, well, actually it's very bad. All of that's really not a good look at all. So you need to be on the front foot of news. You need to have a robust notification plan. You need to know if you have to notify ICO or other supervisory authorities, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do it in the right time frame? You have to understand that you can say to the ICO, we've had a breach. We're not in a position to give you this, and this information yet, but this is how we'll keep you up to date. All of that's part of an effective process. You need to get on with fixing the security problems, and you need to be transparent with everybody involved, particularly if there are customers who are hanging on what's going on. Being transparent doesn't necessarily mean you have to tell them it's all a disaster here, but you need to tell them what they need to know in order for them to manage their relationship with you and you to manage your relationship with them. So communication is a critical part, as it is of all disasters. It's a critical part of dealing with a data breach. In general, don't pay criminals. We understand that there are some circumstances under which you simply have no option because you failed to put in place appropriate recovery plans. Your only way of getting your system back up and running in a reasonable time frame is to pay the criminals. Your insurers may prefer to do that because it's less costly from their point of view, even though there is growing pressure on to not pay ransoms. But you need to be, as I say, you need to be very clear about what you're going to do. Preferably, don't pay the criminals. Be in a position that you don't pay the criminals, because that way, sooner or later, they give up. They're not making money from it. They'll find some other way to make money. Don't wait to notify the public. Tell the public what the public needs to know in a controlled way. Be in a position to share information that demonstrates that you are in control of what's going on. But on the other hand, don't make definitive statements until they can be definitive. Don't say the breach wasn't very bad until you absolutely know it wasn't. Much better off saying we expect to have an update in a week's time. In the meantime, we're taking these actions in order to contain it. This is where we're at. Much better to be factual than to say something which might later on turn out to be wrong. Do you report it? How do you record it? Critical decisions in your planning. When do we tell data subjects? Your staff might be their data that's affected. When do you tell data subjects? That's why you need to know where data is being held. Do you publish on the website? Has your website been corrupted? If you think it's just internal hack and you're going to publish information about how you're dealing with it on the website, but your website gets taken down, how do you then deal with information? All of that needs to be part of what you're saying. How do you deal with the media? Which media might pick up the story and run with it? Could it be the local press? Could it be the national press? How do we deal with that? Do we have a PR company on standby to help us deal with this? Dealing with a breach is a major trauma. You know, many organizations find that actually they need senior incident responder teams on site who can do more than simply deal with the breach, who need to be able to help them put in place a whole strategy to deal with recovery from what has happened. And this slide here, and we're going to share the slides with a recording with everybody, gives you a very good step-by-step guide to the ways in which you go about handling a data breach. So from breach discovered, all the lights start flashing red, your data breach team, that should come together immediately. People should know who's on it. They should know who the alternates are. They should know when people are on holiday, you should know how you're going to get together, particularly in a distributed environment. Do an assessment, determine what has happened, how are we containing it, take the action to contain it, identify who, assess the impact, what recording do we need to do. All of those kind of steps are logical things that you should be doing. So building your process around that is a key fundamental part of your recovery capability. But having done all that, it's worthwhile thinking about cyber insurance. Only 43% of businesses apparently have a cyber insurance policy, and that will be going down because cyber insurers have been going through a period of not entering into insurance terribly lightly, or not providing insurance unless you can demonstrate you have appropriate appropriate defense mechanisms in place. Premiums have gone up, recoverables have gone down. So insurance has got to be a much harder place to turn to. But it's a common way of mitigating the impact of a cybersecurity incident. It enables you to pay for the cost, often very expensive because you're deploying people in at short notice with very high in demand, high value skills, forensic investigations, legal assistance, PR support. All of that can be paid for typically out of a cyber insurance policy. And if you don't have one, you're missing out on a critical part of your impact mitigation strategy. You could be suffering potentially catastrophic damage without the capability of recovering from it. Lloyd's of London is changing its insurance underwriting from March of next year, excluding nation-state cyber attacks from insurance policies in 2023. Right now, a lot of cyber attacks around the industrialized West are driven out of Russia. They're focused on Ukraine, on suppliers to Ukraine, on defense suppliers who are providing equipment supporting Ukraine. And quite often they're carried out by Russian cyber intelligence teams, or they're carried out by cyber criminals operating under the aegis of Russia and protected by them. So increasingly we would expect to see mitigation not being covered by cyber insurance after March 2023, where there's a nation state behind them. Remember, the biggest operators of nation state cyber attacks are Russia, Iran, North Korea, China. From the West side, US, Britain, France, Germany, they all have cyber capability as well. But you're in this part of the world, so the other four are the places you most need to worry about. But of course, that's not going to go away. We're not going to see less nation-state driven cyber attack activity. So you need to recognize that even if you have cyber insurance, it might not be adequate the points at which you're dealing with a catastrophic attack. So it's not an alternative to building proper cyber defense. It's a good way of mitigating impact. It's not an alternative. Saying we don't need to worry much about cyber defense because we've got a good cyber insurance policy is just the wrong thing to do. You need to make sure it's a good cyber defense in depth with cyber insurance built around the fact that the insurer knows you have genuine, solid defense in depth, 5 layers of controls and recovery capability. That's also got to include dealing with your privacy obligations under EU or UK GDPR, under US legislation, as the case may be. It varies depending on where you're trading, but in any cyber breach, you're almost certainly going to suffer a personal data breach as well. A personal data breach is almost certainly always a cyber breach. So you need to think about data protection, personal data protection, and cybersecurity at the same time. They're not separate, they're part of the same activity. And we know that this is a tough time economically. We've got rampant inflation, we've got current recessionary conditions in the UK and a number of other countries, but this is exactly the wrong time for finance teams to decide to cut back on cyber defense, because the 20 or 30 or 50 or 100,000 pounds or whatever it is that you save yourself today on putting in place proper governance, risk management and compliance processes around cyber security could cost you 500,000 pounds, 4 million, 5 million pounds next month or in the early part of 2023, which is exactly at a point in the economic cycle where you do not want to be telling the market you've just suffered a major cyber attack. It is the false economy of all false economies to cut back on cyber protection right now. Remember, cyber criminals know perfectly well that in times of recession, organizations cut back on staff, they cut back on training, they cut back on technology, and they see recessions as wonderful opportunities for them to go and make much larger sums of money. So you have to treat investment in cybersecurity as a counter-cyclical activity. When times get bad is when you need to be investing more in cybersecurity. That way, cyber insurance is likely to work for you. So there is at least evidence that the rampant increase in cyber insurance premiums has moderated a little bit. The data that we see very recently suggests that while many financial markets were badly affected by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that's moderated a bit. That may change. The winter is likely to see a slightly quieter time in terms of the Russia-Ukraine war, but it'll certainly pick up again come spring. But cybercrime will just go on right the way through the winter period. So that's cyber defense in depth. That's recovery. There are a number of ways in which, as you would expect at IT Governance, we can help you deal with those challenges. Of course, we can help you put in place a cyber defense in depth strategy. We can help you build the capability around all of those 5 layers. Above all, cyber incident response planning. So we can do tabletop exercises with you. Sitting in GRCI Law, one of our key subsidiaries, is all of the capability you might want around dealing with cyber incident response. We can do tabletop exercises. We can do emergency data breach management. We can handle reporting to ICO or supervisory authorities across the EU. You can take out a cyber incident response retainer, which is the place that most sensible organizations go because it gives you access to 365, 24/7 service where you know you're at the top of the queue. If you simply call us on our website, we'll deal with you. You'll pay higher prices because that's kind of the reality of the market where ad hoc services are concerned. They are more expensive than retained services. You can do incident response management foundation training. They're all areas in which we can help our clients deal with preparing for and responding to cyber incidents. The one thing I can tell you for sure is that you suffer them, and those might range from as simple as I've locked myself out of my laptop. That's a cyber incident response, cyber incident, very minor, all the way through to we have malware and ransomware all the way across our network. And it looks as though we're going to have to shut down for the next 3 months. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I plan to say. So I'm now going to take questions if you have any. And just a reminder, if you do have questions, there is a Q&A box on the GoToWebinar panel, which hopefully you have in front of you. You can type questions into that. And if you want to type questions into that, I'll pick up any questions there are, and I'll share the questions with everybody. You can also put them into the chat function if you can't see the Q&A. I'll share the question with everybody and, if possible, answer it. You don't have to ask questions, of course, if what I've said is good and clear. So I'm going to take it that I have been massively clear. If you do have questions that occur to you, particularly when we send the slides and recording, you can access that. Please do feel free to email us directly. We're very happy to respond on anything that you've got. Remember, you can go on to any of our websites. You can get hold of us through social media. You can telephone us. You can email us. Any way you like. we're happy to talk to you, help you think about how to tackle the real challenge of cybersecurity, and a real challenge, particularly as I've said, through the holiday season, when cybercrime, when cybercriminals really do take advantage of the disruption that there are in most people's smooth running of their business. Please don't get caught out. Please, if there's anything we can do to help you be in a position to deal safely with that, give us a call. We look forward to keeping you safe. I hope you all have a secure and safe time through Christmas and into New Year, and we'll look forward to joining us perhaps on a webinar in 2023. Bye-bye.